Mom, I was going to tell you eventually. Tell me what, Daniel? There was a pause on his end, the kind of pause that lasts just a half second too long, the kind that tells you before a single word is spoken that something has already happened that you cannot undo. The wedding already happened. I remember I laughed, a small laugh, not because anything was funny, but because my brain simply refused to process it as a real sentence.
What wedding, Daniel? Mine. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone so tight my knuckles were probably white, though I couldn't feel them. I was standing right next to my refrigerator. I remember because there was a magnet on it, one of those little souvenir magnets from Gatlinburg, Tennessee, from a trip I took with my late husband Harold back in 1987. I remember staring at that magnet while my son told me he had gotten married. Past tense, already done. That was the moment I discovered my son had secretly gotten married, using money that wasn't his. If you enjoy listening to the honest memories of someone who has lived long enough to see how complicated family can be, and believe me, I have lived long enough, subscribe to this channel. I don't tell these stories for pity. I tell them because I think some of you out there need to know that what happened to you has happened to others too, that you are not alone and you are not foolish. You are just trusting. Now, let me take you back a little way, because to understand what happened, you need to understand who Daniel was to me and who I was to him. Daniel Harold Whitfield was born on March 4th, 1971. It was a Tuesday, cold outside, one of those gray Virginia mornings where the sky looks like it just gave up. I was 22 years old, which sounds impossibly young to me now. Harold was 24. We were barely adults ourselves, but we were so proud of that baby, so terribly proud. Harold passed in 2004. Heart attack, sitting in his recliner on a Sunday afternoon. There one moment, gone the next, just like that. And after that, it was just Daniel and me. Now, Daniel was not a bad child. I want to make that clear, because this story is going to make him sound like someone you might hate, and I don't want you to hate him. He was complicated. He was the kind of person who was generous when he wanted to be and careless when it was convenient. He could make you feel like the most important person in the room one week and forget to call you for 2 months the next. But he was my son, my only child, and for most of my life, I would have told you without hesitating that I trusted him completely. I worked 2 jobs for most of Daniel's childhood and adolescence. During the week, I worked as a school secretary at Buchanan Elementary, 31 years at that school. On weekends, from the time Daniel was about 10 until he left for college, I cleaned houses. 4 houses on Saturdays, sometimes 3 on Sundays if somebody needed me. I wore rubber gloves until my hands looked 10 years older than the rest of me. Harold worked at the post office, and between the two of us, we kept the lights on, kept the refrigerator full, and managed, just barely some years, to save a little. I opened my savings account at First Union Bank in 1979. When First Union became Wachovia, the account followed. When Wachovia became Wells Fargo, the account followed again. It was the same account for over 40 decades. I know that sounds almost quaint now, but there was something about not touching it, about watching it grow slowly and carefully that felt important to me. That account represented every weekend I didn't take a vacation, every year I drove the same car until the floorboards started to rust. Every Christmas I told myself, "Not this year, Elizabeth, be sensible." By the time I was in my late 70s, I had just over $94,000 in that account. $94,000. I know there are people in the world for whom that sounds like nothing, but for a woman who spent her life cleaning other people's bathrooms and answering phones for a school administration office, that was everything. That was 42 years of discipline folded into a number.
Now, let me explain how Daniel got access. It wasn't careless. I want to be honest about that. It felt like a perfectly reasonable decision at the time, because most decisions that cost you dearly feel perfectly reasonable at the time. In 2018, I had a small health scare. Nothing catastrophic, but I had a procedure that required me to be sedated, and for about a week afterward, I was not quite myself. I couldn't drive. I was slow getting around. Daniel came and stayed with me for 4 days, and during that time, he handled a few things. He paid my electric bill online, refilled a prescription, picked up groceries. He was attentive in a way that reminded me of the boy he used to be, the boy who brought me dandelions from the backyard and called them flowers. When he suggested we go to the bank together, just to add my name, Mama, just so I can help you if something ever happens again, I thought, that makes sense. He's my son. He's responsible now. He has a good job in logistics. What am I afraid of? So we went. I remember the bank clearly. It was a Wednesday. The woman who helped us was named Renata. I remember her name because it was so pretty, and I told her so. She had us sign papers, had me show my ID, explained the terms. I remember Daniel putting his hand over mine as I signed. He said, "This is just a precaution, Mama. I'm not going to touch anything unless it's an emergency." Renata gave me a copy of the paperwork. I put it in my filing cabinet at home, in the folder I labeled Bank Important, and I didn't think about it again. That was my mistake. Not trusting him, I don't fully blame myself for that, but not checking, not watching, not reading statements carefully. After a lifetime of watching every penny, I got comfortable. I was tired. I was old. And I trusted my son. The first sign came in September 2021. I wasn't even looking for it. I had signed up for email notifications from the bank. Daniel had helped me set that up, actually, sometime in 2019.
Usually the notifications were routine, a deposit from my Social Security, a withdrawal when I paid my Medicare supplement premium, small familiar numbers. But one afternoon I was going through my emails and I saw a notification I didn't recognize, a withdrawal of $4,200. I thought it was a mistake. I went back and looked again. It said September 3rd, $4,200, ATM and online transfer combination. I called the bank. A young man answered and walked me through my recent transactions. That was the first time I heard the full picture laid out like that, by a stranger, over the phone, reading me a list of withdrawals I had not made. 6 transactions over 4 months, ranging from $900 to $4,200. Total, just over $14,000. I made him read it to me twice. I sat down on my sofa. I had to sit down, and I held the phone in my lap for a while after he asked if there was anything else he could help me with. I told him no. I thanked him. I sat there. My first thought was not anger. I want to be honest about that too. My first thought was that there had been some kind of identity theft, that someone had gotten to the account without Daniel knowing, because that explanation was easier. That explanation meant my son had not done this. I called Daniel that same evening. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding perfectly normal, relaxed, watching something in the background. I could hear it. I told him I had noticed some transactions I didn't recognize. I asked him if he knew anything about them, and there was a pause. Not the guilty, crumbling kind of pause, not the kind where someone breaks down and confesses, just a flat pause. And then he said, very quietly, "Yeah, Mama, I was going to talk to you about that." I didn't get the full truth that night. What I got was pieces, fragments, delivered in the careful, measured way people deliver things when they're deciding in real time how much to say. He said he'd had some unexpected expenses. He said he was planning to pay it back. He said things had gotten complicated. When I asked him to be more specific, he said we should talk in person. Now, Daniel lived about 3 hours away in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the way he said in person, it felt like a stall, like he needed time to arrange something, to decide on a story. We agreed he would come the following Saturday. That gave me a week of going over bank statements at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, writing down every transaction, every date, every amount. A week of lying awake at night with the numbers marching through my mind. By the time Saturday came, I had the full picture. Between the end of 2020 and September 2021, Daniel had withdrawn $41,300. $41,300. I had the legal pad on the table when he walked in. He looked the same as always, gray at the temples now, but Daniel always had his father's eyes, dark brown, almost black, the kind of eyes that made you feel he was listening when he wasn't. He hugged me at the door. I hugged him back, because old habit is powerful, and because some small foolish part of me, some small foolish part, was still hoping I had this wrong. He sat down at the kitchen table. I pushed the legal pad toward him. He looked at the numbers for a long moment, then let out a breath. Not a sigh of relief, more like something collapsing inside him. "Before you say anything," I told him, "I want you to know I have already spoken to the bank." He nodded, just kept looking at the table. "Daniel, that money does not belong to you." I know that, Mama. Then explain to me what happened. And then he told me. The full story came out slowly, the way water comes through a crack in old plaster, bit by bit, with adjustments, with the occasional reframing when he could see I wasn't going to accept a softer version. His girlfriend, a woman named Cassandra, whom I had met exactly once at a 4th of July gathering 2 summers prior, had become pregnant in late 2020. He said the pregnancy had complications early, and there was some urgency to their situation. He said Cassandra's family was very traditional, very religious, and her parents were putting enormous pressure on both of them to get married before the baby was born. But there was more than that. Cassandra was not a U.S. citizen. She was here on a visa, a work visa as I understood it, and there were immigration concerns, paperwork concerns, a timeline that couldn't be moved. The wedding had to happen, he said. It had to happen fast, and it had to look a certain way because her family was insisting, and Daniel didn't want to create problems with these people who would be his in-laws. And he didn't have. He said he tried to get a personal loan. He was turned down. Some credit issue he was vague about. He said he thought about asking me directly, but he was embarrassed, and he was sure I would want to help anyway, and he had every intention of telling me, and he had every intention of paying it back. "Daniel," I said, "stop." He stopped. "Was there a wedding?" "Yes, ma'am." "When?" "February 14th, this past February." I looked at him. "Valentine's Day," I said. "Yes, ma'am." "And where was this wedding?" "It was at a venue outside Raleigh. A small thing, Mama. It wasn't." "Was I invited?" He didn't answer right away. "Daniel, was I invited to my son's wedding?" We kept it very small, just her family. We were going to have a celebration later. I was not invited to my son's wedding." He looked at the table. I have replayed that moment many times in the years since, not because I want to torture myself with it, but because that was the moment, not the discovery of the money, not the list of transactions, not even the total. That was the moment something changed in me permanently. The money hurt, but being left out of my own child's wedding, a wedding funded with money I had spent 4 decades accumulating, a wedding I didn't know was happening until it was long over, that was the part that took something away from me I have never quite recovered. I waited until he finished talking. He said more things after that, about Cassandra's expectations, about her family's customs, about how he didn't think I would want to travel, about how chaotic everything was. I listened to all of it. Then I told him to go home. He looked startled. I think he expected more, a longer fight maybe, crying. He may have even expected forgiveness in that meeting, the way children sometimes expect parents to process grief on a faster timeline than is humanly possible. "Go home, Daniel. I need to think." He stood up slowly. He said, "Mama, I'm going to make this right." I said, "I know you believe that." And I let him out the door. I want to tell you about that money because I think to understand what this cost me, you have to understand what it was made of. That savings account was not built from anything that came easily. Harold and I started putting money away when Daniel was in elementary school. We decided early on, in that earnest young couple way, that we would save for his education, for his start in life, and for our own old age. We made a deal with ourselves. Every month, no matter what, something went into savings. Some months it was $50. Some months it was $5. I remember one particular winter, Daniel was in middle school, maybe 1983 or 84, when the furnace went out. We didn't have the money to fix it and save that month. Harold said, "Elizabeth, let's skip the savings just this once." I said no. We put in $25 and wore extra sweaters until we scraped together the furnace money from somewhere else. That sounds stubborn. Maybe it was, but that stubbornness was the only reason the account grew at all. I missed my niece's wedding in Hawaii in 2001 because the plane ticket would have cost too much and I didn't want to touch the savings. I wore the same winter coat from 1995 until 2009. When the sole of my good church shoe started separating, I used shoe glue for 2 months before I let myself buy a new pair. That money was not abstract. Every dollar in it had a face on it that looked like sacrifice. It looked like a Saturday morning with rubber gloves in someone else's bathroom. It looked like Christmas gifts that were practical, not special. It looked like Harold's face in those last years, tired but peaceful, because he knew we had been responsible, because he believed that money was safe. $41,000 of it was gone, and the rest, the $52,000 that remained, I couldn't look at it the same way anymore, because I now knew it was accessible to someone who had already decided it was his to use. I did not speak to Daniel for 3 months after that day, not out of cruelty. I simply had nothing to say to him that I was ready to say. During those 3 months, I did several things. First, I went back to the bank. I had an appointment with a branch manager, a patient woman named Gloria, who treated me with the kind of careful respect people sometimes reserve for the elderly and the grieving. I had Daniel's name removed from the account entirely. Every piece of access, the joint holding, the power of attorney for that specific account, all of it revoked. Gloria walked me through every form. I signed everything. When it was done, I thanked her, drove home, and sat in Harold's old recliner for a long time. Then I called my attorney. I'd had the same attorney, a man named Raymond Cho, since 1998. I explained what happened. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Elizabeth, do you want to pursue this legally or do you want to handle this within the family?" I thought about it for a long time. Here is the truth. I could have taken Daniel to court. What he did was technically a crime. He was a joint holder, which made it legally complicated, but my attorney believed we had grounds. I could have pursued it. I chose not to. Not for his sake, I want to be clear, but because I am 85 years old and I have watched people spend years in legal fights with family members, and I have never seen anyone come out of that whole. You spend years fighting, and then you're still sitting there at the end with the same broken relationship and less energy than you started with. But I did change my will. I had always planned to leave what remained of my estate to Daniel, not just the savings, the house, the contents, the car, everything. It was always assumed. I had never questioned it. I questioned it now. After a long conversation with Raymond, I updated my will. I left the house to my church's community outreach ministry. I set aside a portion for my sister Vivian's grandchildren, who are good kids I have always been fond of, and I established a small scholarship through a local organization that supports young women who want to go into education in Harold's name. Harold would have loved that. He always said teachers were the people who kept the world from going sideways. Daniel received a specific bequest in the new will. I won't say the amount, but it is significantly less than what he would have received before, and it is conditional on certain documentation being in order. Raymond said I didn't owe anyone an explanation. He was right, but I told him anyway, because I am a woman who has always needed to say things aloud to make them real. Daniel called me in late January of that year, about 3 months after I'd asked him to leave. His voice was different, quieter, the way voices get when people have had time to sit with something uncomfortable. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was fine. He asked if we could see each other. I said, "I'm not ready for that yet, Daniel." He understood. Then he said, "Mama, I know what I did was wrong. I'm not going to try to explain it again. I just want you to know that I know." I believed him. I believed that he knew. I have found at this age that people generally do know when they've done wrong. The knowing doesn't always come first. It usually comes after the convenience has passed and the justifications have worn thin and they're left alone with what they actually did. Knowing isn't the same as fixing it, I told him. "I know," he said, "and I need you to understand something, Daniel. That money, even if you return every cent, that money represents time I cannot get back. It represents choices I made. It represents your father working himself tired. You didn't just take money. Do you understand me? You took something that I made of my life." He was quiet. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We have spoken several times since then. It is not the same. It will not be the same. He and Cassandra have a daughter. Her name is Harper, and she is 3 years old now, and I have met her twice. She is a beautiful child who had nothing to do with any of this, and I try to hold on to that. But there is a layer between Daniel and me that was not there before. Like glass you can see through but cannot touch through. We are polite. We are even warm sometimes. But the uncomplicated love, the love that didn't require thought, that is gone. I don't think that kind of love, once it's broken, is ever exactly repaired. It becomes something else, something more careful. People ask me sometimes, usually younger people, whether I regret adding him to the account. I've given that question real consideration, real honest consideration. I think the answer is that regret requires believing you should have known better, and I'm not sure I should have. I was a mother who was getting older and didn't want to be a burden and trusted her child. That is not foolishness. That is love operating the way love is supposed to operate. The problem was not that I trusted. The problem was that Daniel was not at that particular moment in his life worthy of the trust I gave him. Those are two different things. I've had to learn to keep them separate. There is one more thing I want to say before I close. A few weeks after I updated my will, I drove out to Buchanan Elementary, the school where I worked for 31 years. I hadn't been back in almost a decade. The building has been renovated, looks different now, but the big oak tree out front is still there. I used to eat my lunch under that tree when the weather was good. I sat in my car and looked at it for a while. I thought about all the years I spent in that building, all the mornings I arrived early and the afternoons I left late. I thought about the parents who came in frustrated and the children who came in scared, and the way a school secretary learns to be a little bit of everything, a little bit nurse, a little bit counselor, a little bit detective. I thought about Harold.
I thought about the early mornings and the rubber gloves and the $25 in the savings account during the winter the furnace broke. And I thought about Daniel, at 4 years old, running to me in the school parking lot the one time Harold brought him to visit, his arms out, his face open, before life had taught him anything complicated. I spent my whole life saving that money for my son's future. I just never imagined he would take it before I was finished living.